since One More Day, the character has really gone downhill as far as use, influence to the story, and evolution of the character or growth in the character. And that makes sense because, the marriage between Peter and MJ were null and void. And you have your opinions on what you think that is, whether it's good or bad or whatever it is, that's fine. But they've never really taken a stand one way or another since One More Day of like, are we, aren't we? And they're not like doing it well. Marvel Comics isn't doing it well. It's always just kind of like a little thread here and there. And I don't want to use the word like be respectful to the fans from before, because like you don't have to cater to the fans. You just write your story and you do what you want to do, and then let the world read your story, and it is what it is. So I don't want people to cater towards fans. I don't want writers to cater towards fans, because that's not what I'm here to say. But what I think has happened is there's never been a clear direction of like, what do we want MJ to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now in the Spider-Man universe? So then when a writer pops in and tells their story, like, things are kind of wonky, and they've continued to be wonky. So a year ago, you got MJ grabbing Peter's hand and being like, hey, I think you should stay. And he's like, yes, I should stay. And then something happens. They reboot the Amazing Spider-Man universe, and MJ has like 2 kids. And then in the most recent issue, with a guest writer, and I don't say this as a knock to Kelly, I just say this as you have important, I guess, continuity things happen in this issue, and it's by the guest writer. I don't know. So in the issue, Peter says, I look at Mary Jane more as a sister now, and I'm using the little L for love and not the big L. And I'm like, okay, that's weird, because a year ago, you guys were a couple, then reboot happens, kids, and Peter's attitude completely changes. So as a reader, I'm just thrown off, and I'm confused. I'm just confused. So for me, I think the best thing to do, if I was an editor at Marvel Comics, I would suggest writing off Mary Jane. I would actually suggest like killing off the character. And I know fridging is bad, and just to use a character's death to kind of elevate the main character's story, like that's lazy writing. But I don't think they have a clear direction for Mary Jane. Therefore, I think being respectful to the legacy of the character and what has happened before, I think the most poetic thing to do would be to kill off the character. I think that's what you should do. If you can't figure out how to handle the character right, and if you have no plans of them ever getting back together, having her pop up in the background and just infuriating fans. And again, this is where I don't want you writing towards fans. I want you to write the best story that elevates the character. But I think killing her off would be the best thing to do. I think if you did something kind of like Identity Crisis, where it's about love, it's about sacrifice, it's about what it means to wear the cape and the consequences that happens when you wear the cape, like, and you tell a powerful story like that, that's where you could get one of these moments that we really haven't had in a long time, where you're like, oh my God, this is a key moment in Amazing Spider-Man lore, and this is a book that you need to read as a fan of Spider-Man, and this is a book that you hand off to your friends that you're like, oh my God, if you want to know why Spider-Man is what, this is one of the stories you need to read. Because I'm thinking about all the different Spider-Man stories that have happened in the 914 issues. what are those stories? You know, like things jump out to you with like Batman. It's like you have Year One, you have Frank Miller stuff, you have Alan Moore stuff. Like, what are those stories with Spider-Man? I mean, there's Kraven's Last Hunt, there's the death of Captain Stacy, there's a few like Goblin stories that are really in there, but it's all the early stuff that really carries the weight. I mean, like, there's now like Spider-Verse and things like that, but like that expands the Spider-Man universe and are good to read with like Peter Parker stories where you're like, oh man, this is Peter Parker reeling and battling and just grinding out like a hero's journey. Like, think about those stories and where you think those stories are. And if you have a comment of like, what are some gritty, amazing Spider-Man, not gritty, I don't use gritty. What are some amazing Spider-Man stories since 2000 that really shows who Peter Parker is and who he is and how Spider-Man and Peter Parker come together and they become this force for good, and they kind of like defy the odds. The everyman superhero or kid that he was, and what it means to be Spider-Man. Like, what are those stories? There's the 9/11 book that comes up right to my mind, you know, where you feel Spider-Man in the city and you feel him grieve with you. And I mean, I guess Peter Parker is this like lovable loser, kind of emo-ish character that's just struggling to get by. And he's had highs and lows, and he's been all over the place. But like the core, I don't know if the core element of the character is him just being like, shit, the world is on top of me, and I'm getting crushed by a building, but I have to get out of this to save other people. The self-sacrificing person, that's got to be like a core element there. And I think with the death of Mary Jane story, with a good writer, Tom King, you're the first guy I'm thinking of on this. If you're going to tell a sad story and have Peter looking out the window on a rainy day, like, you're the guy I want to be telling that story. But I think a death of Mary Jane story could elevate Amazing Spider-Man to that next level. I think it's been pretty stagnant for a very long time, and I think that could be the story that like reinvigorates or just clicks. And I think since they don't want Mary Jane and Peter Parker to be together, like, I think that's what you got to do. You know, I've been like wrestling with the idea of like, well, how do you make this character be as powerful as she was before, or how do you let her ride off into the sunset and, you know, have everything that embodies her and have the story do her justice and everything like that. And the only way I see a legacy character like MJ like getting her due or getting the story she deserves is if they kill her off, because there hasn't been anything new to kind of like elevate her, and they've tried a few different things. I remember in the late aughts she was like a superhero, and they tried to do a few different things here and there, but like then you'll have all the remembrances of who she was, and you'll be like, oh shit, this was this character here, and this is why this character was so powerful. And you teach or you inform another generation about Mary Jane. And since it's comic books, who knows, 10 years after the death of Mary Jane, like, Mary Jane could come back. But like, I think this is a chance to tell something amazing. And I did a poll on Twitter, and I'll put the results up on the video. And people overwhelmingly want MJ and Peter together. And that's another reason why you either just stop writing about her, but that doesn't do anybody any good. But if you have this passionate fan base that wants them to be together, having that passionate fan base mourn for her loss and then rally behind Peter as his journey as a character evolves and he moves on from his grief and he becomes the next level of whatever his evolution is. I think that's the best way to go. And I don't want to sacrifice Mary Jane to elevate Peter, but I also want Mary Jane to get her due, and I don't know if there's any way for her to get her due without them killing her off, if that makes sense. Let me know in the comments below. I know this is probably kind of some rambling here, but yeah, what do you think Marvel should do with Mary Jane as a character? Should they kill her off? Should Peter and MJ get back together? Should they just stop writing about her, just shelve the character for a long time, and then bring her back when there's new editorial or whatever they want to do? Also, what do you think about different writers writing? You know, you have a 20 issue block of a writer doing this one way, and then you have another 20 issue where the new writer does something else, and then you have a guest writer write something completely different. You're like, what do you want from your comic book experience? You know, with legacy characters. We're talking about Amazing Spider-Man, 914 issues. We're going to be on 915 issues. Like, you have your Batmans, you have your huge characters that have this huge legacy. How do you want to see them? I don't want to say the word treated, but like, how do you want editorial to treat how do you want editorial to treat legacy characters? And do you want editorial to be the guardians and kind of rein in writers, or put writers to be like, this is your path you can go on, and these are the rules that you should follow when you're dealing with this character, this legacy character? And then, you know, it's the writer's job to figure out, how do I push the boundaries within the rule system and go from there. And then sometimes you're like, hey, I have this great idea and I need to get off this road, and the editor is like, oh yeah, that's really an amazing story, so we have to tell this story. So I mean, nothing is ever like so rigid that you can't evolve out of it. But like, do you think editorial needs to give writers guidelines of what they can and can't do with legacy characters?